Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey, it's Debbie Potts, and I'm doing a podcast follow-up with Peter Defty, the founder of Optimal Fat Metabolism. And we're going to dive in a little bit deeper today about keto and carbs for the endurance athlete, as what we read out there on keto and weight loss and health benefits and exercise may be a little different for you, the endurance athlete. So if you want to improve your performance and longevity, as I discuss all the time on this podcast, how we can train the whole athlete with the holistic method approach, working on nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, movement, digestion, gut health, and hydration and happiness. It takes a lot more than just your exercise training routine to be healthy. And today, Peter and I are going to specifically talk about how fat adapted can help you become a better athlete and improve the aging process. But what is keto? What is low carb? What is high carb? And what is your carb threshold, as well as what is OFM all about? So you can go back and find our podcast we had out just a few weeks ago, where we talk about OFM, optimized fat metabolism, based on the foundation of nutritional ketosis. And it's the beginning of the OFM performance curve, where the extremes, both of the keto camp and the high carb camp, fall into the middle and address real life and the real you, what you face in daily life as an athlete, endurance athlete. And we'll talk a little bit about what if you're a obstacle course race or CrossFitter, how does that change your needs for carbohydrates? So let's bring on Peter and dive in a little deeper, as he is a pioneer in this field. Go. All right. Hey guys, I've got Peter back on the line to dive in a little bit deeper about the fat adaptation process for the endurance athlete, but also the keto versus carbs, to what do we need to do to improve our performance and longevity as an endurance athlete. So thank you, Peter, the pioneer in this area. Let's dive in deeper with all these questions we got from our last show.
Yeah, welcome to be back on, Debbie. I really enjoyed speaking with you the last time, and of course our off podcast conversations since. So yeah, looking forward to kind of putting out some radical thoughts that the camps don't seem to agree on.
So what are some big takeaways or things since our last podcast that you got back from our listeners? I know you had said you got some emails and we had some Facebook questions. And what did you learn that people maybe need to know more about?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've seen actually through all the years of getting a whole lot of fat is people have to realize we're right in our own mind. And until we realize that and can step back from it, it's really tough to be able to take in new ideas in a way that we can really take them in and think about them and how they apply to each individual. Because, you know, I think technology has driven a lot of...
What? We lost you there. His screen froze. So are you there? So talking about technology and perhaps how that impacts us. So let's stop for a moment. Okay. There we go. Go for it.
Well, I think with technology, it's sort of driven this binary thinking, because we're getting inundated with so much information, and we're trying to be the best we can be. And a lot of people are type A and they want to be quote unquote perfect, which is a whole nother can of worms, that we take in, and then we fear in a way we're not going to be good enough, or we're missing something out if we don't do this, this, and this. And then we don't take it in and think about it and how it really applies to us. And so people get a message and they either yes, no, black and white, good, bad type of thought process, this binary thought process. So you know, the gulf right now we're seeing with the diets of athletes, you know, you have the high carb camp, and it's like all about the carbohydrates for performance, and complete cognitive dissonance of the unintended consequences of chronically eating too many carbs. And then you got the keto camp, and it's like, you know, you got to be keto, and if you're not doing good enough, you're doing something wrong, and you have to lower your carbs, and if you go over 50 grams a day, you know, you're a disaster. And so that binary thinking is really being driven by all this information that we're being inundated with. And so we have this right mind, and for me, it's an evolutionary hardwiring of survival. And yet it's manifesting itself in a weird way, because we don't have to worry about surviving, but yet that same psychological thought process is in place that gets our brains to fire, and our physiology going this way, where it's like, yes, no. And instead of just be human and think about, okay, how does this apply to me? Or, oh, this is a new idea I'm not familiar with. And instead of rejecting out of hand because it's a new idea, consider it.
I think, you know, like you were talking about in the recent blog I really liked, is what fat adapted means. And I think a lot of people think it means no carbs if you're doing keto. And I think that's what you're saying, that, you know, that you can't have any carbohydrates if you're doing keto. And when we're getting all those marketing message, it's not targeted, as we said last show, towards endurance athlete. And, you know, then there's those people doing more high heart rate, burning more glucose in CrossFit and obstacle course training, you know, that, you know, how many carbs can everyone tolerate? So we listen to all this stuff for keto and all these blogs and articles and Facebook group pages, you know, people losing 50 pounds, 100 pounds. And that's targeted. The research is targeted for keto for people that have chronic health issues, that insulin resistance and different health issues in the brain function, which is all so important. But I think if we want to figure out, okay, what should we do as an endurance athlete? Then we can even talk about short, high intensity interval workouts like a CrossFit or obstacle course racer. That what do we do? Because we feel like, you know, carbohydrates have been demonized, that we can't have any. Then those keto carnivore, that's really the rage right now. So talk about your comments you said in your recent vlog video that people can find on ofm.io, and understanding what, you know, the binary thinking, keto to high carb, and where do we fall as a fat adapted athlete.
Yeah, well, as you say, the fat adapted athlete, especially one who's doing aerobic work, doesn't mean they're not doing intensity work and resistance work. They should be, but somebody who's developing their aerobic potential is a completely different animal from most people who are doing keto, including people who are doing keto to look good, to have the big guns, to do the Keto Gains Flex Friday on Facebook, you know, show their six pack and their guns. There's certain physiological differences that I'm seeing occur when you get fat adapted physiologically by lowering your carbohydrates and getting into that, shifting into that more ketogenic state, which ketos isn't really the whole physiology. It just means your blood has ketones in it, right? And there's a whole bunch of things that are occurring simultaneously, and depending on the signaling and what's going on. But you got to get that, and that's the thing. The fat adapted human who's developing their aerobic potential, it's a totally different thing. And the real take home that I want people to listen to and step back and consider is, the more carbs you can tolerate when you're a fat adapted athlete, you know, in this state, that is actually a sign of just how well fat adapted you are.
Mm-hmm. That you can tolerate more carbohydrates.
That seems counterintuitive, but the more, yeah, your level of adaptation really is.
So I should probably back up a little bit. Can you just review for people who are new to this? What is fat adapted mean? What does it mean and how do you get fat adapted? And that's kind of what OFM's about too, I think.
Right. Well,
Simplified.
it's like, yeah, the simplified. Yeah, I know I lose people. I'm sorry, Debbie. Okay, so physiology, right? It's not about a diet or an exercise. You focus on the diet, or they focus on the training, um, and get lost, and nobody's looking at the physiology. They're like talking about the physiology, how it relates to a diet or that. It's like you need to look at everything, not just one thing, because we got to do a diet where you lower your carbohydrate load, and for everybody it's an individual. So that's the first place to start, is you're an individual, you're not a commodity. And as an individual, you do your homework, and like I say, your mind is your biggest muscle, so you need to use it properly, otherwise you'll use it against yourself. And that's where that lockdown binary intransient thinking goes. You use it against yourself rather than looking at each little piece and saying, okay, how does it fit with me? So that's the first thing, individualize. And then you want to lower hydrate load in a way that works for you down to these levels that will get you into that state where you have that metabolic flexibility, is that term that's being tossed around or not, but it really means that your body's producing ketones. It can produce glucose hepatically rather than burning through your glycogen levels. It means it can burn fat, and getting that physiology. So that's diet, but it's also stress. It's like I say, stress, when you're chronically stressed, that's as big an issue as the carbohydrates, right?
And that's what I'm focusing on my coaching business. Chronic stress
it's
impacts
one of the things we
everything.
focus in on OFM. Yeah, I mean, OFM is about optimizing the fat metabolism, because and stress is a big part of it because of that. And then you're looking at underlying conditions. You're not looking at dialing in things. And one of the things I like to do is think about it in the context of making it doable in the context of your life, you, the individual. How does it work for you versus how does it work for somebody else?
And that's what you call
unfortunately,
intuitive.
the way a lot of things are being marketed.
Intuitive nutrition.
It becomes intuitive, but it's also just looking for doable ways to make it work for you, so it becomes intuitive. Because if you've already got patterns of behavior that work for you, you don't want to change it up to be radically different, because that just adds more stress. Like the whole thing about where to shop. Like I tell people, look, I can make it work on fast food temporarily if I have to, but if you're shopping at your regular supermarket and buying the fresh produce and the fresh meat, poultry, seafood, eggs and dairy are a bargain, buying produce on sale when it's in season, or shopping the loss leaders because they use meat as a loss leader, you can do it in the context. Most people, they don't have time to go to a Whole Paycheck or the farmer's market. And I think people get too stressed out about this whole organic, grass-fed, we start diving into the minutia of all this stuff, and people are stressed out because they want to get it perfect. And that's a big thing in terms of getting fat adapted, is take that stress out. Identify stressors in your life, whether it's your relationships, your work, your training, and it's like I tell a lot of type A athletes, use your type A to lose your type A.
Yeah. Well, that's what I do with my health coaching, the holistic method. And we do our 30-day transformation program, which I work on liver detox and digestion, leaky gut, and hidden stressors, internal and external stressors. So it's always all right, identify those energy robbers and look at those people, those vampires that just make you feel grumpy and agitated and increase stress in your life. But I think people, for me, that's why I'm really excited to focus on coaching people with this program, because working with you in the OFM and then working on the health coaching side, people forget that to be fat adapted is not just about low carb, high fat. There's so much more to it. So as we're both saying, if it's chronic stress all the time, you're just I became insulin resistant, even though I was doing fasted workouts. I was doing low carb, high fat. I was doing my bulletproof coffee, but I was chronically stressed. So it defeated everything. Still became
Right.
insulin resistant.
And I'll bet part of that chronic stress was because you were trying to be perfect and chasing all that
Yes.
stuff out there that a lot of the gurus online are saying, like, you got to have this brand of coffee or this brand of collagen, or else you'll get aflatoxin, or
Yeah. So true.
And that's instilling, and that marketing just alone, even if you're not doing it, instills fear and stress in people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's it. And the other thing that like I was just saying earlier, is you got to develop that aerobic engine. And that's one of the big tenets of OFM is, trying to develop your cardiovascular system to its potential first in terms of the training, because why would you not first develop to its potential the feeding system, the system that gets the oxygen in, the red blood cells in, the nutrition in, and takes the waste products out, takes the heat out, and causes you to sweat. And that's where a lot of the people in the keto world, I think, are missing a huge health point and performance point. They'll get the muscle hypertrophy to get the six pack or the guns, but they're never going to get the overall health and performance potential they need to sustain them to their potential long term. I'm not saying they're not going to be healthier. You're going to be healthier by doing low carb, by working out. But if you don't develop the your heart, your lungs,
Foundation.
right, that foundation, and then the feeding tubes, the arteries, veins, capillaries, microcapillaries that feed it, I think you're shortchanging yourself. And so, and that's on a fat burning physiology. And that's where we go back to the rhetorical question I have is, you see a lot of people who cite the quote unquote science that tells them, oh, I can get by on just HIIT training, and you don't need to do chronic cardio. And some people even suggest chronic cardio is bad. But it's like I step back, and rather than reject that out of hand, I'm thinking, okay, well, why are they thinking that? And it's like, there's a reason. And that is, the body of science is based on chronic cardio being fueled by what?
Carbs.
Carbs. And so is it the fact that you're doing a lot of exercise and fueling it with a bunch of sugar? Or is it the fact that you're doing all that exercise? And what we're seeing with the athletes I'm working with right now, and over the last consistently over the years, is they actually get stronger, not stronger and fitter, not just in the sense of their endurance and stamina, but also their overall strength, their explosiveness. They get leaner. They won't get all bulked up because you're not creating that type 2B anaerobic fast twitch muscle hypertrophy. They're creating the type 1 aerobic slow twitch and the type 2 aerobic fast twitch muscle fibers that keeps them very lean. And while they'll get the muscle definition, they will build up to some level. They're not going to get this like huge bulkiness that's hard to maintain, and they'll be able to do the work and actually do more reps.
So let's kind of back up into the common challenges you talk about on your blogs and your video blogs. You're saying that the common challenges are the less than optimal dietary choices because of the rigid nature of both regimens of the high carb and keto camps, and then bonking, typical with high carb but can occur with keto, and high intensity performance levels, typical with keto but can also occur with high carb. GI issues, both keto and high carb can produce GI issues during exercise, post-exercise soreness, and adrenal HP axis stress. So can we dive into, maybe some of those?
Yeah. Go ahead. Help me here.
The first one, you say a common challenge is the less than optimal dietary choices because of the rigid nature of both camps. So the keto camp versus high carb camp. So talk about.
Right. Well, that goes back to the whole mental thing that we both like to dive into. It's like people are stressing about getting it perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And once you're adapted, what we've seen is, as I said earlier, the more carb tolerant you are, that is an indicator of how well fat adapted you are.
And
Okay.
that's metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, that's the term that's being tossed around. I would like to say it's probably a lot more complicated than that.
Hmm.
It's not like you're switching from one to another. It's that blended thing where you're trying to use all your fuel systems. Like I've got a blog on fuel energy partitioning where we go through the high carb, the keto, and then the OFM state, where what you want to do is be able to access all those energy delivery systems, including exogenous energy intake. Okay. And
Hmm.
so people less than optimal, one of the things of being fat adapted is you can get by on less than optimal because you don't have to be beholden to eating less than optimal foods if you don't feel you need it. But also, you know, on race day, I tell people, don't worry about it. You can have whatever you want. And if you're doing endurance and it's Coke's okay. Coke can be magic, Um, and you don't stress about it because once again, that stress will produce cortisol and of course it's off to the races burning sugar. Um, so that's what I'm talking about there.
Okay. Next one, I think we should move on to the next topic, bonking. As a lot of athletes, I know, for example, I have a client doing my 30-day program, but she is a Spartan racer and they do a ton of high intensity exercise. And she's definitely a sugar burner. But what if she wants to become a fat burner? But instead, she's trying to switch to more of a high fat, low carb, but she experiences bonking. So bonking, you're saying it can be high carb, but also with keto.
Yeah, there's several things going on here, and like the typical, when you're a carb burner, the bonking's pretty obvious. You're just going through the glucose so quickly that you can't keep up, whether it's the delivery of exogenous intake of gels, liquid, shot blocks, whatever, or your glycogen stores, right? That's pretty simple. But in the, you know, um, bonking occurs with keto athletes too, because they can't they got a limiter on them, so they can't get to that super high state. So they can, and if somebody tries to just physiologically push themselves, they'll bonk. But the other thing that can happen with a keto athlete that can be really devastating is they'll have a slow bonk, and that's due to them not getting enough hydration. And that's not just fluid water intake, that's sodium, mainly sodium, but electrolyte intake. And it'll turn into a slow bonk. It feels like a slow bonk. It feels like a bonk, but then sometimes it'll take hours to come out of it because once you start down that path of bonking and keto, with getting your electrolytes out, your body will start pulling potassium out of the cells to compensate for the lack of sodium that you're sweating out because the body's trying to thermoregulate so you literally don't burn up. And then that hydration bonk, if you start getting this kind of dysregulation of both intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid, so inside the cell fluid and outside the plasma, the sweat, the thing that turns into sweat, it takes hours for the body to re-equivocate the right electrolyte balance. So that can be really devastating. I've had several athletes do this, um, and it takes hours rather than just taking a gel with your conventional sugar bonk, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're right back up. And that can also happen with high carb athletes too if they get their hydration off. I mean, hydration is getting talked about a lot, but there's there's a lot of hydration is a real tricky and very dynamic thing. And I think this whole idea of testing sweat rate is misleading because when you do a sweat rate test, you're testing what your sweat rate is at that moment in time under those conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little
And
different.
it's different in the real world, and it can vary. And especially this time of year when we're going from summer to winter, you can be all over the map with your hydration needs. And consequently, you can do the other thing where you hydrate too much and then you wind up bloated and sausage fingers and toes, and that'll actually impede your performance. So, um, I wish I could give people the simple answer, like "Make America Great Again," that a lot of the health people
Yeah.
health people put out there. I mean, that simple answer, but it's very dynamic and it's very individualized. But you can do it.
Well, I often need just putting Himalayan sea salt or real salt into my water throughout the day. And I notice that's a big difference for myself. And then I take magnesium a supplement at nighttime, but don't you find a lot of people are just minerally deficient? They just need to add some Celtic or Himalayan sea salt into their water or on their
Yeah,
food?
yeah, yeah, just sea salt, and then just eating enough salty foods to do it, and then not doing things like prehydrating. Prehydrating is one of the things that's the worst thing in the world, because people have it in their head they got to stock up, and your body regulates your fluid level, and you keep a reserve on. And as you get adapted, like right now, I don't know if you've noticed this, Debbie, but training all summer in the heat and the sweating and all that, like now that it's turning cold, you're running to the bathroom all the time because you got to
Yeah,
urinate. And the fluid, the thing is we as fat adapted athletes, or athletes in general, our ability to retain that fluid reserve when we're sedentary, and then so we have it on board when we're active, we have a reserve. Like, most people should be able to go a couple hours of a hard workout and be able to have enough fluid on them. And I like to see people lose a little bit of fluid. So prehydrating can actually deplete those easily accessible mineral reserves you have in your liver and bones. And then all of a sudden you don't have them on race day.
true. All right, next one is high intensity performance levels, typical with keto, but can also occur with high carb. How is that a common challenge for people trying to be fat adapted?
Okay, so this is where the keto thing has kind of gone off the rails, and the keto camp's not willing to admit some of the limitations of a keto diet. And like, we use nutritional ketosis as a tool. It's one tool of many in the toolbox. Like I don't make Vespa like the one and only thing. I make it one tool in the toolbox, just like nutritional ketosis. And so with it, you want to use nutritional ketosis to get that physiological shift. But once you've achieved that shift and you've built that aerobic base, you want to keep bringing carbohydrates in when you have those harder workouts, or the volume goes up, because you don't want to regulate the pyruvate dehydrogenase pathway. That's an enzyme commonly known as PDH that helps you process glucose for quick energy. And that's what will happen if you do deep keto for a prolonged period of time. You'll downregulate that enzymatic pathway, and then all of a sudden, even if you add sugar, you don't get a bang out of it.
Yeah, I think it's high intensity performance levels is what I was saying earlier. I find it interesting watching CrossFitters and the Spartan race community, and how do you really need to have a high carb diet, and that is it possible for that sport to be fat adapted, so they're burning fat most of the day, but then they can go burn carbohydrates when they're doing their training. But I think so many of them think they need to have so much glucose because they are using that when they're exercising, but they don't realize the rest of the time when they're not exercising, they should be burning fat.
Well, and it's like I say, it's not a one or another. It's a flex. It's not even a flexibility thing. It's a blend. So when somebody's doing a CrossFit workout or doing a Spartan race, they're using a lot of fat and they're using a lot of glucose because their energy output's so high. So my proposition here, or my positing, is that if you can increase your fat burn by, say, 10, 20, 30, 40% incrementally, that's going to conserve 10, 30, 20, 30, 40% of your glucose and allow you to use it for those surges into your threshold and anaerobic spectrum, and keep that reserve. And that's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, I've got several high level OCR racers who are just killing it in these workouts because they've gone through OFM, developed that aerobic base, got their fat burn really high without impeding their glucose burn, and they just can just destroy these courses as a result.
So that, just side note, what are you having them eat before training? Because a lot of us endurance athletes, I haven't eaten yet today because I've been busy, but I can do very good fasted workouts. But do you find that those athletes do more high intensity workout need to eat a little something before they work out and after?
Not necessarily right before and after, but yes, before. There's a pretty big window. Like we'll have a lot of people eat carbs the day before when they're fat adapted, and it's kind of interesting, and I know I'm going to get a lot of flack from people because I'm all about the fat adaptation, but I'm pushing the carbs when people need it. And it's kind of funny because the amount of carbs that we're seeing people who are well adapted be able to tolerate and get that big bang that carbs are known for, it's a whole lot more than people think. And it really kind of goes back to the original carb loading studies that come out of Sweden in the 60s. We're seeing fit people do 250, 300, and even 400 grams a day before. I mean, a lot of carbs, and they're fat adapted. All it does is make them go fast, does not affect their fat adaptation one bit.
How do you know
And
they're fat adapted,
for
though?
the keto camp.
Yeah, so exactly. But how do you know? Are you saying you're fat adapted because you can go without eating for 4 hours? Are you doing a Keto Mojo glucose ketone test meter? How do you classify or verify that you're fat adapted?
I classify it mainly by the experience. You can use the data, but I like people to use data to confirm the experience, and that you develop that intuitive athlete.
Yes.
Are you there, Debbie?
Yeah. So no, I think that's a lot of it. What I agree with what you say is that, you and I have my clients do this test for 30 days and get to know how that feels. So then when you are burning fat versus if you're burning carbohydrates or you're not fat adapted. Is that what you are saying? Whoops, we lose you.
The signal
Okay.
for some reason is going up now. Okay.
So I was just saying that I think the testing, I have clients test with Keto Mojo is what I've used because you can do ketones and glucose for 30 days and just kind of get the feeling to know what it feels like when you're showing 0.5 in your ketones or 0.1, whatever it might be, and that your glucose is balanced. Because what we do in nutritional therapy as practitioners is goals to stabilize your blood sugar and not have those highs and lows. So testing that, I suggest, 4 to 6 weeks so you get an idea, and then you have more biofeedback to know what's what for you as an individual.
Yeah, and that's a good way, but it's really important that with a lot of people, because technology is such a big part of our life now, we've kind of been culturally driven to think technology is the end all. Like, you got to have an app for everything, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
like sleeping.
Yeah, everything's.
Feelings,
I mean,
sleeping
everything's metrics, and we think that this is all, but we didn't evolve doing all this. We didn't evolve to eat by counting our calories and calculating our macros. We were evolved to eat and enjoy food, and so, and that's just an example. But so yes, I mean, it's really important that the athlete know that testing is to reinforce the experience. So that the primary goal is to note the experience, whether they can get up, do a fasted workout for 2 or 3 hours, not eat anything and not be destroyed and hungry after. And, just be able to feel that those steady energy levels, the getting lean, the clothes fitting looser, all the kind of things that one experiences versus what the numbers say. And I think we've gotten too hyper focused on the numbers rather than the experience. And I'm not trying to just count the numbers one bit. They have a very good place in helping to guide us, but focus on that, your experience as an athlete, to develop that intuitive athlete thing. Because when you go to race, you don't want to be looking at your power meter. You don't want to be looking at your watch. You want to be racing. This is about that primitive instinct to compete and survive and thrive. And that's hardwired into us. And you don't put an app to that.
That's why I love talking to you, because I say that same thing all the time. It's like, I don't look at a power meter heart rate. Granted, I haven't done Ironman since 2012 in Hawaii, but when I was racing, I was doing low carb, high fat, and I was doing fasting and doing UCAN and doing all the stuff you hear about now. And I didn't look at my power. I still don't have a power meter. And I did, top off the bike when I was Ironman Canada. And I was listening to my body and knowing where I feel good and being able to yell at and cheer at other people. So it is such a key thing is not to get so caught up in all those gadgets. Plus you'll save a lot of money.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So back to this whole thing about carbohydrates and stuff, it's just that this is heretical, but we're really pushing the carbs right now for somebody who's metabolically fit. Like if somebody's gotten fat adapted because they did have an underlying issue, or they're gluten intolerant, or they're celiac, or they got an autoimmune disorder, there's definitely got to be more careful. But probably 60-70% of the people that are listening to this who are being athletic and considering this whole idea of keto or fat adaptation, they really need to understand how different the fat adapted athlete is, especially when they develop that aerobic engine, and then how that when that carbohydrate tolerance goes up and you can use carbohydrates effectively, it's actually going to help you get through those workouts or that race really in good shape. And by doing that, you're going to create the stimulus, the adaptive stress you need to super compensate, which is otherwise known as training effect. It gets you stronger and fitter. And that's one of the things we've seen is several athletes I've worked with through this, they actually get stronger in heavy training loads or race loads rather than get worn down by them.
Exactly. And I know that we have two more things to go over. I'm running out of time. So hopefully we can fit. GI issues for keto high carb can both produce GI issues during exercise. And then we'll finish up with post-exercise soreness, which you're just kind of touching on now.
Yeah. Okay. So with the GI issues, of course, the high carb camp, it's like when you're trying to, I'll pause it this way. Like I'm saying right now, and I'm gonna have a video coming out on it. So like when you sit down to a meal, do you try to do a workout? No.
Yeah.
Right. So why would you want to consume a meal equivalent of calories when you're trying to perform physically? And it's just allocation of resources. I mean, your body's if it wants to exercise, we want to put the resources of blood flow to the muscles, and from the muscles to get the waste products out, to thermoregulate, et cetera. And so depending on the conditions, your digestive tract gets downregulated in terms of blood flow and digestive capacity. And especially when it's hot, heat and humidity, it basically goes into sleep mode. And so if you can't transit the right amount of electrolytes and water, which will pass through the stomach and gut barrier osmotically, the osmotic potential will just draw that through and into the bloodstream to maintain plasma volume. And the right amount of simple sugars will do that too. But otherwise, what happens to a lot of people is the food matter will sit in there, and if it's in sleep mode, it'll just sit there, and then all of a sudden the microbe in there will start to work on it, and then you get fermentation going. So your stomach and gut turn into a big brewing batter, and that's where you get the bloating and the gas, and then worse, right? And with the keto people, they've gotten so focused on fats for fuel that they're trying to do fats when they're racing. It's like your digestive tract doesn't want to do a lot of processing, so you're not going to eat a lot of protein and fat because it'll go right through you. And you see how people use MCT oils, and that can have like disastrous consequences.
Yeah,
like it'll
exactly.
literally go right through
Disaster
you.
pants. Yeah. Well, that's what I laugh about in all these Facebook group page for fat adapted athlete, the fat endurance pages, whatever ones you look at, and they have these people saying, "Oh, should I eat olives and cheese and have my MCT oil on a bike ride?" I'm like, okay, do you really need that? And are you going to be able to digest it? As I talk about, people have heard in all my other podcasts I've been doing, my solo shows are just all about digestion and what you eat, but how you eat and when you eat is so essential. And so if you try to do a high fat snack while you're exercising, how are you even going to digest that? So that's why, to me, fasting works better, or a liquid, or like what we'll talk about next time on Vespa.
Exactly. And they're missing the whole point of fat adaptation. That's to use your own body fat as your base energy source. So that's supplying it more, and you're topping it off with a little bit of exogenous carb calories.
So just add to that, that's what I think is pretty funny, is all these supplements to add ketones into your body, when it's like, all right, do we forget about how we're supposed to be in nutritional ketosis is because you are metabolizing fat in your liver, and the byproduct are ketones. So when you drink ketones in a beverage, that's not because you're breaking down fat. Yes, it's good for your brain fuel and it actually makes me feel full, maybe decreases hunger, your appetite, and your blood sugar, but you're not breaking down fat to get those ketones.
No, and like Steve Finney says about the ketone supplements, he says, why do I want, 6 or 8 grams from a ketone salt when my body makes 50 grams a day?
Exactly.
And I think for a fat adapted athlete, you're probably north of, 200 grams a day of ketones, because they'll just spit it out. And the ketone esters are kind of interesting too, because they work, but it's kind of interesting how they work and how you have to use them to get the performance. Because if you're fat adapted and you use ketone esters alone, they won't do anything. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
You have to bolus them with some carbs because you need the insulin response to drive the ketones into the cells.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because the exogenous ketone esters are not quite exactly the same as the ketones your body produces.
All
So
right.
it's very interesting. Yeah.
That's a good point. That's something we should talk about. So post-exercise soreness, let's finish with this, and we'll just have to have you on monthly to dive into all these other topics because we still have lots to go into. Let's wrap up with post-exercise soreness. How does low carb, high carb, keto, what helps to decrease muscle soreness and improve it instead of...
This is one of the reasons for shifting to optimizing your fat metabolism, to be able to utilize fats as much as you can, because the post-exercise soreness it's like everybody's talking about recovery and recovery this, recovery that. And I'm like, well, why don't we look at preventing the damage so you don't have the damage to recover from? And that's where and that's a kind of a big paradigm shift, because I don't want to talk about recovery. I want to talk about damage prevention, and then we'll deal with recovery later, because then you don't have to recover from it. Right.
Yeah.
So that's really the whole point, because the more you can oxidize fat through beta oxidation, the less oxidative stress you're going to have, the less lactate load you're going to have from burning a lot of glucose, and all of that is going to reduce in less muscle soreness. And this is the kind of thing that people who are doing this are seeing. Like I just saw some people who are just average people doing 100 milers, and they're back of the pack people, and they're talking about, oh my God, this is the first time I'm walking. I'm going to go out for a run 3 days after my race, and I'm not, needing assistance to sit down and get up. And that's the kind of thing that people see. And part of that is, it's not only with preventing damage, but then the flip side of that is going back to what I talk about with supercompensation and training effect. All of a sudden, the adaptive stress that you get from training is not going to try to get you back up to baseline to recover. It's actually going towards making you stronger, fitter, faster.
And that's, I think, every type A, AAA triathlete, endurance athlete's goal is, right? And performance and hopefully longevity.
Oh, yeah, I've got so many people. I just saw something today. Somebody wrote me and they say they did a 16-year PR at the 70.3, and then another one said, yeah, I feel 30 years younger. And I'm not saying that to toot our horns. It's just, it's there. And I've had so many female athletes tell me it's a reverse aging process. Now you're going to Kona, right? You're going to Kona next week?
Yeah. And I'm excited because, well, if you know, Tim O'Donnell and Rennie, he's working with, sponsored by UCAN. So he's switching to a low carb athlete. So it'll be interesting to hear his story. And then we've got Dave Scott that's working with S Fuels. He's all about the low carb athlete too. So it's funny, as we said earlier, before we started recording, that you and I have been doing this since 2005. And that's why, I'm excited to just focus on this as my main business, to coach the whole athlete. And that's using more, nutrition, liver detox, digestion, that side of it. But I think it's fascinating to see, these pro athletes and others are starting to switch over. So it'll be interesting what happens, even though one of the main sponsor of Ironman this year is the Vega
Yeah.
Sport and Advil or
Yeah.
Leaf.
Oh, really? Oh, it's interesting, huh?
Yeah,
It's interesting. It's interesting. I won't say anything more. Yeah.
I know.
So yeah, I don't know how much if she'll have a chance, but one of the athletes I'm working with who's going to Kona is named Beth James, and she'll be competing in the physically challenged with her daughter Liza. It's Team
Oh,
Liza,
wow.
and she's 55, and they were the first mother-daughter team to complete an Ironman, which was Wisconsin. It wasn't an easy Ironman. And I think there's only one other female team to have
That's
completed an
great.
Ironman. Yeah,
Well,
and
I
so
have a
she's
press pass, a VIP pass, so I can, if you can email me their names, so I can watch them and hopefully get some press coverage on them.
yeah, I appreciate it if you would. We should talk about that. But anyway, actually, Vega did a profile on her because it's Vega Ironman. I think the Ironman and Vega are doing profiles on different people, and they did and I think Liza uses one of their products, and Beth sometimes uses their electrolyte product. Liza, of course, because she's got sensitive digestion, so some of their products work very well for that.
It's funny.
So, yeah.
So we'll have to have you on next month and we'll go over the rest of this. I want everyone to make sure you look at the show notes. We'll put the OFM website and the article we're talking about today. We'll put that on there, and Peter does a great video to talk about it as well. And I always like how the videos have the notes written out so you can go back and read it over again. And we'll keep live video feed on Facebook Live, Instagram while I'm in Hawaii. And thankfully I got a VIP pass and media access. So I will get up front and get lots of great information to share with everyone. But Peter, we'll have to have you come on next time and continue on talking about fat versus carb restriction. And I think it's a great time of year to talk about this a little bit more often, because off season, hopefully people start to do the lower heart rate MAF type of training. And it's when you want to start working on your fat adapted process. And you and I can both be available to help people in different ways to improve the whole athlete from the inside.
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea, because we can help people navigate the holidays too, right? But also use that time to get better shape and not necessarily quit their training, but do it in a different way. But also with the low heart rate MAF training, we've seen some really interesting things with fat adapted athletes that aren't applying, and the conventional MAF with 180 minus your age. For the majority of people out there, they'll plateau. They won't get the gains if they're fat adapted. There's more to come here, folks.
So keep in touch, you guys, and send your questions to either of us. And we've got the Low Carb Athlete Facebook page and Instagram, as well as a podcast page. But this is what Peter and I are both passionate about, helping you all become fat adapted. And, it's all about burning fat, but also optimizing your health and improving your performance in life. So not just your sport this year, but we got to look into the future, make sure we're not speeding up the aging process with oxidative stress and creating more internal metabolic chaos. So thanks for sharing my journey, Peter.
Yeah, no worries. I'm looking forward to working more with you, Debbie.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.